Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The Vatican has confirmed that Pope Francis's funeral will take place this Saturday. Today we discuss further updates on those arrangements. After accusing each other of breaching an Easter ceasefire, Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky signal readiness for peace talks. Sudan's paramilitaries kill more than 30 in a new attack on a Darfur city, forcing up to 400,000 people to flee one of the region's largest displacement camps. India and the US have finalized a new roadmap for trade that could see India purchasing more defense equipment and energy from the US. Today, we continue our coverage of the passing of Pope Francis, who died at 88 after a long battle with a chronic lung condition. Known as the Pontiff of Peace and a champion of the poor, his legacy resonates worldwide. The Vatican says his funeral will be held on Saturday at 10 a.m. in St. Peter's Square, followed by 9 days of mourning. So who is attending? And who is not? And who will be the next pope? Speculation already swirling around the possibility of the first black or Asian pontiff in centuries. For more on what to expect on the days ahead, I'm joined by correspondent John Bevir. John, great to have you on the show. So we've got some important dates from the Vatican today. Can you remind us of the funeral plans?
Yeah, of course. So Saturday morning, 10 o'clock local time, is when the funeral starts. That really is what people here are working towards. What we've heard from Pope Francis before his death was that he wanted a simple funeral. He is a pope who did away with many of the luxury trappings of office of his predecessors and lived a relatively simple life. And that, it seems, is something he wants to continue in death as well, doing away with some of the more ornate traditions when it comes to a papal funeral. And that is what we are going to be hearing more about in the coming days. Tomorrow, the body of Pope Francis will be moved to St. Peter's Basilica that you can see behind me, where people will be able to pay their last respects in person. And as you might expect, we have a huge number of people arriving in Rome and at Vatican City in order to pay their final respects to a much-loved Pope.
The Vatican, as you said, has also now released these details of the time the public may view the Pope. But I was just wondering what security is being set up around where this is going to happen. Because I remember when Queen Elizabeth died in London, just the volumes of people that came.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to make that comparison. That is very much what the city of Rome feels like at the moment. It feels like London in the days after the Queen's death. Of course, Rome is well versed when it comes to hosting large events and when it comes to hosting funerals for popes as well. So this is a well-oiled machine, as it were, when it comes to these large-scale logistics, but that doesn't make things any easier. You will be having hundreds of thousands of people arriving, if not potentially millions. So that puts a huge strain on everything from infrastructure to hotels and restaurants to, as you say, the security arrangements as well. So we are seeing a much higher police presence in Rome and at Vatican City as well. There are very clear paths for people to line up. They are letting in limited numbers of people to the different areas. I would imagine there will be a huge queue in order to see Pope Francis when he is moved into St. Peter's Basilica tomorrow. The Pope, though, didn't want to make this too much about himself, as strange as that might sound. He said very much he doesn't want to be put up on a pedestal, quite literally, for people to look at. So there are changes being made to the funeral compared to funerals gone by, but it's certainly expected to be incredibly busy.
So, John, we have also heard from a whole host of world leaders and senior figures who will be attending the funeral. Can you tell us who is expected to make the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. We have got world leaders from across the globe. We have religious leaders, presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens and princes, and pretty much everybody in between making the journey here to pay their final respects. This truly is a global event. We've heard from people like US President Donald Trump confirming that he will be here along with the First Lady. We have, as I mentioned, presidents and prime ministers from across Europe, Asia and Africa expected to attend, as well as members of royal families. Interestingly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also due to be here as well. Him and the Pope had a fairly ongoing, extensive dialogue after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Pope Francis, though, was criticised by some, though, for not calling out Russia and going further to condemn them. So it wasn't always an easy relationship between the two, but Volodymyr Zelensky has said he will be attending. So it really is going to be a huge array of global leaders making their way to Rome for the funeral on Saturday.
And John, the conclave to elect a new pope starts on the 5th of May. Can you tell us more about this really highly secretive Catholic tradition?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is what you just said there, secretive. It is the cardinals under the age of 80, they have to be, I should point out. Those who are under that age limit, they are secured in rooms in the Vatican, and then they are cut off from the outside world in terms of communication. So no phones or internet. And no messages allowed with the outside world, and they take it in turns to write the name of the person they think should be Pope and put it forward. And when an agreement is made, we will see the smoke rising to signal an agreement, and then the new Pope will be announced. Of course, some people have got more of an understanding of that whole process because of the Hollywood film Conclave, which came out recently and won all sorts of awards. So there is that added interest as well in terms of the timing of all of this. But as you say, it's highly secretive. It is an ancient tradition. So there will be lots of pomp and ceremony surrounding that as well, of course. And with an estimated 1.4 billion Catholics worldwide, there is plenty of interest in who the next Pope will be. There's also lots of conversations about where the new Pope will be from as well, and whether we might have another Pope from the Southern Hemisphere like Pope Francis.
John Bevir in Rome, thank you so much for joining us. Earlier this morning, the Vatican released the first images of Pope Francis since he died. It was in the Santa Marta Chapel, in the residence where Pope Francis chose to live, and he was lying in a coffin, dressed in a red outfit and holding a rosary. His Vatican family was there praying and paying their very last respects. After Pope Francis's death, the priest of Gaza's only Catholic church says the Pope called him every day to check on the Christians there.
Buonasera, Santo Padre.
Buonasera, come stai? E dimmi,
Sì.
cosa avete mangiato oggi?
Del pollo, le ali. El resto de polli. El resto del pollo, la salita, ¿qué tal, Santo Padre? Lo que quedó del pollo de ayer. Acá venía a saludarlo algunos Karima.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Okay.
From the Vatican to the Philippines and Pakistan, Catholics are saying goodbye to their spiritual leader. Now, after US President Donald Trump gave both Ukraine and Russia a deadline to reach a deal this week, Russian President Vladimir Putin has responded. Putin has hinted he may be open to direct talks with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky for the first time since the early stages of the war. This comes after Kyiv proposed a 30-day ceasefire on long-range drone and missile strikes targeting civilian infrastructure. While Zelensky did not respond directly to Putin's proposal, he signaled that he is ready for any conversation about a ceasefire that would halt attacks on civilians.
Now, after Easter, the whole world can clearly see that Russia is the source of this war. If there is no such firm Russian order for ceasefire, then there is no ceasefire. Nevertheless, Ukraine stands by its offer, at the very least, not to strike civilian infrastructure, and we expect a clear answer from Moscow. We are ready for any conversation on how to ensure this. A ceasefire, real and lasting, must be the first step toward a secure and enduring peace.
For more on this, I'm joined by Senior Editor for Outcome Modelling Analysis at Issue Insight, John Kavulich. John, great to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining me as always. The Kremlin says peace talks are only possible if Kyiv removes obstacles. This comes a day after Putin suggested direct talks between the two countries. But the obstacles, John, are yet to be outlined. What is your reading of the mood for negotiation from the Russian side?
The primary obstacle now, as indicated by President Putin, is this, the Ukrainian government needs to be able to have a dialogue. And what President Putin's talking about is that there is legislation that was codified that restricts what kind of dialogue the Ukrainian government can have with President Putin, with the government of Russian Federation. So, that's what we're seeing is, the definition of the word clarity. It's sort of like two people that are groggy and they're being told to sober up and wake up very, very quickly, but they're not really prepared to. So they still want to have this balance of, well, we're there, but we're not quite there, but we're going to get there.
And do you think that's coming from both the Russia and Ukraine side?
It is. President Trump is certainly putting more pressure on President Putin because he already knows that he can get pretty much whatever he wants out of President Zelensky. President Zelensky will be vocal. He will insult, he will dispute, he will say some things and do some things that are really uncomfortable, make President Trump angry. But in the end, President Trump knows and President Zelensky knows that the Ukrainian government is going to fall in line with what the U.S. wants. On the Russian side, however, President Trump is frustrated. And the key for everyone to understand is that when President Trump says he will walk away, he will walk away. He is not a politician with that DNA that once they get attached to an issue, that no matter what happens, they have to stay attached. President Trump can at one point say, I've given it a shot. These two aren't paying attention. I'm moving on. And then he knows that that puts pressure on Europe, which is a win for him because he's always wanted Europe to do more anyway.
So what are your thoughts on the diplomatic efforts to actually end this war? You've said it's far from the norm. Tell us more.
We're going to have a meeting tomorrow in London where it's sort of a technical group, but Secretary of State and the Special Envoy are supposed to be there, along with senior representatives of Ukraine, as well as the UK government. So there is that dialogue. But what I'm watching is Saturday, because President Zelensky has said he's going to the funeral of the Pope. Now, President Zelensky went to Paris for the reconsecration of Notre Dame. There wasn't any reason for him to go there, but he wanted interaction with President Trump, and President Macron made that happen. So what I'm looking to see Saturday is, does President Zelensky really need to go to the funeral of the Pope? No. Did they have disagreements? Yes, they did. And President Zelensky was very vocal during the last 4 years of criticizing the Pope. But does he really need to be there? No. but who's going to be there that he wants to see? And that's President Trump. So the next moment of all of this is going to be Saturday to see how does President Zelensky maneuver to get time with President Trump at the funeral of the Pope. So it's inappropriate, but President Zelensky is pretty good at trying to force his way into things. And then what kind of pressure does that put on President Putin? Because now President Zelensky has had a face-to-face with President Trump. President Putin's going to need to do something, and he's going to need to do something that's formidable, because President Trump is getting bored. And when President Trump gets bored, like a cat with a shiny object, they get bored with the object and look for another object.
So we'll all be watching Saturday now after what you've just told us, John. But according to Dutch intelligence, just moving on, Russia's ramping up these hybrid attacks on Europe. How damaging are these attacks, and what risk do they pose? Because we know Europe needs to be at the table in these ceasefire talks.
Well, Europe wants to be at the table. I think President Trump would divert a little bit from that in saying that they don't necessarily be at the table, but they're a welcome guest. Once dinner is over, dessert has been served, and people are having coffee, then the Europeans are welcome to come in. But the deal is between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia. As far as what you were asking about on Russia and its, what they're doing with disinformation, what they're doing, ramping up their ability to use RT, to use their different media channels, they're incredibly aggressive, and they're really good at this. One of the mistakes that I think Europe is making and the U.S. is making, but trying to isolate the media apparatus of Russia rather than taking them on. Let them publicly do what they want to do, and then throw all the resources at them to try to counter whatever message they're doing or they're trying to project. And they are being aggressive. Moldova, where I am, they're having a parliament election coming up in September. They're gearing up for a lot of potential issues. Romania has another election coming up. Poland's got an election coming up. And Russia is going to be very, very active trying to move its messaging. I think everyone else needs to be just as aggressive in pushing back.
Senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight, John Kavulich. It's always fascinating to have you on the show. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A Hamas delegation has departed for Cairo to discuss new ideas aimed at securing a ceasefire in Gaza. The proposed plan includes the release of all Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails, a formal end to the war, and a complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. The latest ceasefire collapsed a month ago when Israel resumed bombing inside Gaza. Harvard University has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for freezing federal grants worth $2.2 billion. The university claims the freeze is unlawful and would hamper critical disease research. The Trump administration froze the funds after Harvard refused to comply with demands to suppress student protests and screen international applications based on their political views, particularly regarding Palestine. US President Donald Trump is backing US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth after reports that military attack details were shared in a group chat that included Hegseth's wife, brother, and personal lawyer. In the second signal chat, the US Defense Secretary shared information about airstrikes against Yemen. This comes a month after a journalist was added to a signal group chat in which US cabinet officials, including Hegseth, discussed plans to attack the Houthis in Yemen. And now to Sudan, where renewed fighting in Darfur has forced over 450,000 people, many already displaced, to flee again in search of safety. The latest violence follows a deadly attack by the Rapid Support Forces on Al-Fasa, killing more than 30 people. The city lies 800 kilometers from Khartoum, where the civil war between the RSF and Sudanese military began 2 years ago. The conflict has turned Sudan into one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. I'm now joined by Sudanese journalist Awad Mustafa. Great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. So we just saw some images on the screen there. There's been renewed fighting in Darfur. What has sparked this latest round of violence that we're seeing?
What has sparked the violence is the push out of Khartoum by the Sudanese armed forces to the Rapid Support Forces. They have been pushed out of Jazeera as well. And most of their forces basically went into Darfur, and this large area made up of 4 states is their home ground, you can say. So they have been based out of there, and they've been bombing and shelling civilians and non-armed people in those areas. The latest round of violence we've seen has been on Zamzam camp, which has been a refugee camp, and it's been, I mean, I don't know how to describe it. It's terrible. It has been a refugee camp for most of the people coming to the west of Sudan, away from the violence in Khartoum and in Al Jazeera and other cities. And it's been home to almost 500,000 refugees. And there has been bombing by the RSF and this outright attack last week, which has resulted in 400 deaths and the deaths of all the medical staff. The latest attack as well on Al-Fashir has taken 30 civilians, and they have been outrageous.
So you mentioned there it's been outrageous, and it appears to be on these refugee camps where displaced people are trying to find some safety. Do they have anywhere to go? It's a desperate situation. What's happening with this huge volume of people? So
the Zamzam camp and the Abu Shouk camp have been the main camps where the RSF has taken control before. The people, the civilians from across the country headed towards that. Now, with the unavailability of those 2 camps, no humanitarian corridors, no humanitarian aid arriving to the people, the displaced people really have a tough situation to follow right now. They have been. There is the corridor to, the border with Chad, which seems like the only solution at the moment, or they can go to other areas where the army has taken control, but the roads and logistics of such movements they cannot be imagined.
So we talk about the situation in Sudan and how difficult it is and the fighting that's going on. Do you think enough has been done by the world to help the situation in Sudan and maybe try to broker some kind of ceasefire deal?
The ceasefire deal or any deal that comes through is up to the RSF commanders and the SAF commander. And the Sudanese Armed Forces offered and negotiated a deal before that, but the RSF commanders did not hold to it. Now, there is something in the works at the moment, and Saudi Arabia, the US are involved in it, but the likelihood of a peace deal coming out of this is very slim, as per what the Ibrahim Jaber, the Sovereignty Council member, stated on an interview with Al Arabiya day before yesterday.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. That was journalist Awad Mustafa. Once again, thank you for talking to us about the situation in Sudan.
Thank you.
Let's take another look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Around 49,000 accident and emergency patients have to wait 24 hours or more for a hospital bed in England last year. Data compiled by the Liberal Democrats shows the longest wait was 10 days and 13 hours. This surge in long waits has raised concerns about the impact on vulnerable populations as demand for urgent care continues to rise. US border authorities are grappling with a wave of egg smuggling from Mexico. It comes as American consumers are seeking relief from record prices for eggs, which are exceeding $10 per dozen. The price disparity has created a thriving black market where a dozen eggs is selling for around $3. The crisis stems from multiple factors such as the avian flu outbreak, which has devastated poultry flocks nationwide. The Poás volcano on Costa Rica's most popular tourist attractions erupted suddenly on Monday. Experts confirmed that the strong eruption spewed a column of ash that was at least 1.8 miles high. A European Space Agency project is assessing the viability of growing so-called lab-grown food in space. The experiment is expected to reduce the cost of feeding an astronaut, which can be up to $26,000 per day. The US Vice President J.D. Vance says the US and India have finalized the terms of a trade deal. It comes after Vance met with India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Delhi. As part of the deal, Vance says India should drop some of the non-tariff barriers in order for the US to access the market. India is among a number of countries negotiating trade deals with the US during Trump's 90-day pause on higher tariffs.
Americans want further access to Indian markets. This is a great place to do business, and we want to give our people more access to this country. Look, President Trump and I know that Prime Minister Modi is a tough negotiator. He drives a hard bargain. But we actually feel that India has much more to gain from its continued defense partnership with the United States. And India, like America, wants to build. And that will mean that we have to produce more energy. That's more energy production and more energy consumption.
Our correspondent Ishan Garg tells us more from New Delhi.
Trade has been the focal point of J.D. Vance's India trip. When Mr. Vance met India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday for very lengthy conversations, the meeting concluded with the two sides announcing that they have now decided on what's called the terms of reference of a bilateral trade agreement. This essentially means that the two leaders have decided on the directions and the overall contours of how the negotiations of this trade deal are going to take place. The two sides say that this agreement is going to be crucial to boosting India-US bilateral trade to about $300 billion by the end of this decade from about $129 billion that it currently stands at. Now, this trade deal is crucial for New Delhi because it is hoping that through this deal, it will be able to cushion some of the impact from the US tariffs. US had announced 26% tariffs on New Delhi, which have now been paused for 90 days. But many analysts had said that if those tariffs were to continue, India could be hit with nearly $7 billion in losses in trade every single year because of them. Now, India's tariff rates compared to other countries are still relatively low, but still New Delhi is hoping to negotiate a trade deal with the US, and it wants to provide the US lower import tariffs on a variety of products, all the way from cars to automotive products. And that's something that US President Donald Trump had wanted from India all along. But analysts are also saying that J.D. Vance's visit to India is also to, in a sense, ensure that this trade tension between US and India does not derail the overall relationship, which is perhaps why when he was speaking to academics and bureaucrats in the North Indian city of Jaipur, he said that apart from trade, defense ties are also crucial for New Delhi and US ties at a time when both sides want to see a more secure Indo-Pacific region. Ishan Garg, Al Arabia News, New Delhi.
For more on this, I'm joined from Washington by our correspondent Nick Harper. Nick, great to have you on the show. So we just had Ishan Garg there, but during his speech in India, J.D. Vance has admitted Trump's tariffs will cause profound changes. What more did he say? And does the news of a possible trade agreement with India breathe a sigh of relief for other countries trying to figure this out?
Yeah, Leigh Ann, certainly some positive news seeming to coming out of this India trip from J.D. Vance. The White House has said at one point it was hoping to do 90 deals in the 90-day pause on these tariffs. And India is perhaps near the top of the list of countries wanting to do a deal. It's trying to avoid a 27% tariff rate being placed on it at the end of this 90-day pause. So certainly some hope coming out of this. We know that Japanese and South Korean trade ministers are here in Washington, D.C. this week to speak to the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, to try and hammer out some sort of deal. So good news coming out of India, but it's still not exactly the finalised deal. J.D. Vance said that this was a vital step, calling it a roadmap towards a final deal. So final details still need to be confirmed, but he did speak about the shared priorities between Washington and New Delhi, talking about the desire for both countries to create jobs, to build durable supply chains, and to improve prosperity for workers. And he said he thought that the two countries could work successfully together, and he saw the 21st century being one of prosperity and peace for the US and India.
So positive news there out of those talks in India. But Nick, the IMF has slashed its growth forecast for the US, China and most countries, citing the impact of US tariffs.
That's right, a tremendous reduction for all major economies around the world. The IMF saying that the harm that tariffs has caused means that they are downgrading their global economic forecasts. And the hardest hit amongst all of the advanced economies is the United States, the very country that has announced these trade policies and these tariffs. In terms of global growth, the IMF now predicts that there will be a 0.5% reduction from down to 2.8% growth during the course of this year. And they called those tariffs being something that were creating major negative shocks worldwide, saying that there would be significant slowdown because of Donald Trump's policy. So a huge change, and certainly some concerns coming from the IMF in terms of what all of that will have an impact on around the world over the coming months.
And Nick, I just want to talk to you about the president who's backing his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth. And this comes amid a second signal chat row. What's the latest on this?
Yeah, this is the possibility that Pete Hegseth shared details with family members, sensitive classified information about airstrikes being carried out against Houthi targets in Yemen. That is something that he has so far denied. He's denied it again on US television just a few hours ago, speaking on Fox News, lashing out at critics, saying that quite simply they were unhappy with the speed of change he was implementing at the Pentagon, and they were essentially trying to get their own back. Donald Trump has also backed him as well, describing him as doing a great job, saying that everyone is happy with him. However, we have had at least now one prominent Republican come out to say that Pete Hegseth needs to be replaced, suggesting that there is chaos surrounding him at the Pentagon, and saying that these scandals with the signal chat and the release of this classified information is enough reason for him to be replaced at the top of the Pentagon.
Nick Harper in Washington, covering a wide range of stories. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let's take a look at the top business news now. The Swiss drug maker Roche has said it will invest $50 billion in the United States over the next 5 years. The move will create more than 12,000 new jobs. The announcement comes as drug makers unveil investments to deal with tariffs from the Trump administration, which is trying to boost domestic manufacturing. The US Commerce Department has announced plans to impose tariffs of up to 3,521% on imports of solar panels from Southeast Asian countries. It comes after an investigation that began a year ago when several major solar equipment producers asked the administration of the then President Joe Biden to protect their US operations. They proposed levies targeting companies in Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, and also Vietnam. Turning to all the sports news now, and former Australian cricketer Michael Slater has been handed a partly suspended 4-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to domestic violence charges. However, the 55-year-old will walk free, having already served more than a year in custody after being refused bail in 2024. And Norwich City have sacked Danish manager Johannes Hoff Turup following a poor run of results. The Championship club has appointed his assistant and former England midfielder Jack Wilshere as interim coach until the end of the season. Norwich lost 3-1 at Millwall on Monday. A reminder of our top stories. The Vatican has confirmed that Pope Francis' funeral will take place on Saturday. Today, we did discuss further updates on the arrangements. After accusing each other of breaching an Easter ceasefire, Russian President Vladimir Putin and his Ukrainian counterpart Zelensky signal readiness for peace talks. Sudan's paramilitaries kill more than 30 in a new attack on a Darfur city, forcing up to 400,000 people to flee one of the region's largest displacement camps. India and the US have finalized a new roadmap for trade that could see India purchasing more defense equipment and energy from the US. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora is coming up next, followed by Hadley Gamble's interview with the former automotive executive Carlos Ghosn. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.